Kate craved quiet. She yearned for escape. The city had been her cage for too long, its constant noise and frenetic pace suffocating her spirit. She dreamt of stars, of silence, of the scent of pine needles and damp earth. So she packed her life into her beat-up jeep and pointed it north, toward the vast, whispering forests of Maine. Her destination, a remote cabin, nestled deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It was a place almost forgotten, accessible only by a winding dirt road that snaked through towering pines. The air grew cooler as she drove, the sunlight filtering through the trees in long, ethereal beams. She rolled down the windows, letting the crisp November air wash over her face, carrying with it the promise of peace she so desperately sought. The cabin, when she finally reached it, was just as she'd pictured, small, weathered, but sturdy. Smoke curled invitingly from its chimney, a testament to the fire she'd built earlier in the day. As dusk settled, painting the woods in shades of deep purple and grey, Kate felt a sense of calm she hadn't realized she'd been missing. But even in the fading light, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The trees seemed to press in closer, their shadows lengthening with the setting sun. The cabin was a sanctuary. It was small, only a single room, but it held everything she needed. A wood-burning stove radiated warmth, chasing away the November chill. The scent of pine sap and wood smoke filled the air, a comforting aroma that spoke of simpler times. There was a rough-hewn table by the window where she ate her meals and wrote in her journal. Nights were the hardest. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. She would lie awake in the darkness, listening to the wind whistling through the trees, her imagination conjuring shapes in the shadows. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. She told herself it was just her city nerves slow to unwind. It was silly to be afraid. She was safe here, wasn't she? The locals had warned her, old men with weathered faces and eyes that held too much wisdom. They spoke in hushed tones of the shadow season, the time when darkness lingered longer and the veil between worlds thinned. November, they called it, a time for caution, a time for fear. The woods hold secrets, one old-timer had rasped, his voice rough as gravel, things best left undisturbed, especially in November. But Kate had dismissed their warnings as folklore, the ramblings of minds steeped in superstition. She was a woman of logic, of reason. Ghosts and shadows held no power over her. Still, their words lingered in the back of her mind, like embers waiting to be fanned into flame. She found herself avoiding eye contact with the gnarled trees that surrounded the cabin, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes in the moonlight, and when the wind howled through the woods, she imagined she could hear voices whispering her name. It started subtly, a soft thud against the cabin door, barely audible above the wind. Kate dismissed it as a falling branch, but the sound persisted, growing louder, more insistent. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. Her heart pounded in her chest. Who would come calling in the dead of night, miles from civilization? She peered through the peephole, but all she saw was darkness. The knocking came again, louder this time, rattling the old wooden door in its frame. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, her hand trembling around its cool metal. Holding her breath, she slowly unlatched the door and threw it open. The porch was empty. The next day, Kate tried to rationalize the events of the previous night. She told herself it was just a prank, some teenagers from the nearby town looking for a scare. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The woods felt different now, heavier, as if something watched her every move. One evening, as dusk settled over the forest, she saw it, a figure tall and gaunt, silhouetted against the dying light. It stood at the edge of the trees, its form wavering and indistinct, like smoke given shape. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the fading light, but the image was seared into her mind. The way it stood, motionless, its head cocked to one side as if listening, the way it seemed to melt back into the shadows, leaving behind a chill that seeped into her bones. The encounters grew more frequent, more brazen. She would catch fleeting glimpses of the figure at the edge of her vision, always just out of reach. Footprints appeared in the dirt outside her cabin, long and narrow, with an unnatural length to the stride. And the knocking on her door continued, each night louder than the last. Sleep became impossible. She lay awake, listening to every creak and groan of the old cabin, every rustle of leaves outside her window. Her nerves were frayed, her mind on a knife edge. The isolation that had once been so comforting now felt like a suffocating weight. She was trapped, hunted, with nowhere to run. One night, driven to the brink by terror, Kate decided to leave. She packed a bag with essentials, her hands shaking so badly she could barely zip it closed. As she stepped outside, the wind seemed to rise, whipping around her like a living thing, and then she saw it. the figure standing in the middle of the dirt road blocking her escape. No one is sure what happened that night. Some say Kate ran into the woods, driven mad by fear. Others whisper that the figure took her, dragged her screaming into the darkness. All that's certain is that she was never seen again. The next morning the cabin stood empty. The fire had burned out, leaving behind a pile of cold ashes. Her belonging remained untouched, as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. The locals found her jeep abandoned on the dirt road, its engine cold, the keys still in the ignition. The police investigated, of course. They searched the woods, questioned the few locals who lived in the area, but found no trace of her. The case went cold. Another unsolved mystery in a world full of them. The cabin remained abandoned, a silent testament to whatever horror had unfolded within its walls. Locals avoided it, whispering tales of strange lights and disembodied screams echoing through the trees at night. Some claimed to see the figure, tall and shadowy, lurking at the edge of the woods, its eyes burning with a cold, malevolent light. Over time, the story of Kate and the shadow figure became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires and in hushed tones in the general store. A reminder that some places are best left undisturbed, especially during the shadow season. A reminder that the woods hold secrets, and that some secrets are best left buried. The wind still whispers through the trees surrounding the cabin, carrying with it the echoes of fear and the chilling truth. Some shadows never truly fade.